Imagine the gut-wrenching anguish of suddenly losing someone you love in the most devastating and tragic of circumstances, and then spending more than 30 years fighting for answers, for the truth of what happened, for simple justice for the one you lost.
I think it's time that the MOD came out with the truth and finally told us what the circumstances were leading up to that crash and why our loved ones were allowed to fly on that helicopter, which was unairworthy.
Imagine being stonewalled at every turn and told records vital to any investigation have been sealed away for, wait for it, 100 years.
The crash is being talked about by the MOD as a tragic accident. It was not an accident. And we want accountability, we want answers.
And then imagine being denied the very opportunity to find out what really happened by a Prime Minister who had promised you transparency and accountability.
I feel completely and utterly let down. I feel that we've been dismissed and horrifyingly deceived by the MOD.
It's unthinkable, isn't it?
Good evening. An RAF Chinook helicopter with 29 people on board has crashed in the west of Scotland.
The Chinook helicopter was flying from Northern Ireland to Scotland in 1994. There were 29 people on board, including army and intelligence officers, when it crashed on the Mull of Kintyre. All lost their lives.
After the crash, the pilots were blamed. But following a long campaign, Flight Lieutenants Jonathan Tapper and Richard Cook were exonerated.
3 decades on, the families are calling for a public inquiry.
I was just 7 years old when I lost my father. My younger brother and sister were 2. I just remember there was a knock on the door. It was a colleague of my father's, and they just said, "Is your mummy in?" And I remember in that moment, I just had this sinking feeling. I just knew something terrible had happened.
It was one of the RAF's worst peacetime losses of life.
Those passengers went to work one day and they come home 4 days later in a box. We don't know all the circumstances, the truth behind it. There hasn't been transparency, and there's a lot of revelations now. People are coming forward, and we feel we need to know, we deserve to know.
Last year, a BBC documentary highlighted concerns over the Chinook's airworthiness. MOD documents passed to the BBC, one written 9 months before the crash, detailed serious concerns about the helicopter's computer software, describing it as positively dangerous. Now, a former RAF test pilot from Hampshire has claimed that the Chinook helicopter that crashed was on a show flight to prove its safety. Retired squadron leader Robert Burke, who was based at RAF Odium at the time of the crash, says the newly upgraded helicopter was chosen despite safety concerns being raised about its airworthiness.
My main job was flying aircraft after rebuilds, or when something was wrong with them which couldn't be analysed in the air by other pilots or on the ground, and we were doing the road testing for the Mark II Chinook.
Robert Burke says there were concerns that the Mark II wasn't ready for duty in Northern Ireland.
I had real concerns that the Mark II Chinook was not fully developed for service. I fought against going to Northern Ireland, and so did the Chinook flight over there. John Tapper, he asked for a Mark I to be kept over there because of his worries about the Mark II, and particularly about this specific aircraft.
Robert Burke claims that the Chinook, which was carrying senior intelligence and security personnel, was ordered into the air as a show flight to prove that the upgrade was safe.
It was a prestige flight by the Air Force to show the Army that the Chinook was ready for service.
The Ministry of Defence says this:
The Mull of Kintyre crash was a tragic accident, and our thoughts and sympathies remain with the families, friends and colleagues of all those who died. The accident has already been the subject of 6 inquiries and investigations, including an independent judge-led review.
But if, as the MOD say,
the Mull of Kintyre crash was a tragic accident,
why seal records vital to any investigation away for 100 years? And as for this,
The accident has already been the subject of 6 inquiries and investigations.
As Trevor Burney, the director of the television documentary Chinook Zulu Delta 576, has pointed out.
I think that all you have to do is listen to the families, and the families have been very clear. They don't feel they've got the truth. And, you know, all those inquiries really looked at the pilots and, you know, the pilots' families campaigned for many years to overturn the slur that had been inflicted on them erroneously. And they did. They managed to do that.
More than 3 decades on, the cause of the crash is still unknown. And Prime Minister Keir Starmer has now rejected calls for a public inquiry.
In a letter to the families, the Prime Minister has said he does not believe that a new inquiry can bring any greater certainty or is in the public interest.
The Prime Minister's decision has been slammed by campaigners as pathetic.
We've asked the Prime Minister to jump in and actually give us a public inquiry, because currently we're going to have to go down the legal route. We've asked him, he responded yesterday, he's rejected that request. He's basically, on one hand in the letter, stated that the government are committed to transparency and accountability, but on the other hand slammed the door straight in our face and said this is not something that we can get. And personally, I found it quite pathetic, the response, and it shows a complete lack of moral leadership from our Prime Minister, and we've completely lost faith in our government and our Prime Minister because of it.
The Prime Minister says it's unlikely a full public inquiry would identify any new evidence or reach new conclusions. The family's lawyer disagrees.
Incredible that 31 years on, we still haven't looked at what was known about the airworthiness of that particular aircraft. It's been excluded from all the previous inquiries. And indeed, when there was a crash in Afghanistan some years ago, they did include the airworthiness of the plane within the terms of reference. But that's been excluded in relation to these families.
This is the same Prime Minister who promised transparency and accountability.
In relation to the tragic cases that she raises, firstly, I thank her for raising them, and it is important that we have a legal duty of candour. We will be introducing that because, as she says, there must be the truth here based on all people being dealt with on the basis of dignity, fairness and accountability.
But his refusal to allow public inquiry is the exact opposite of what he promised. In fact, it's an outright refusal to be transparent and accountable. And think about this. What could possibly be so sensitive that it needs to stay sealed for 100 years, denying grieving families the opportunity to know the truth of the tragic circumstances that led to the loss of their loved ones? Those that died served their country, and they and their families now deserve honesty and transparency and justice from this government. So please help them break 3 decades of silence by signing their petition calling on the Prime Minister to hold a judge-led public inquiry and allow them access to the documents which have now been sealed for 100 years. 100 years! It only takes a moment to sign the petition and you'll find a link with this film. The MOD has been allowed to mark its own homework on this tragic crash for 31 years. Let's now help the families achieve the justice we all know they deserve.